When I was 13 years old, I poisoned my father and my brother. It wasn't an accident, it was a choice. They were planning to kill my mother that night for the insurance money, and after that, they were going to get rid of me. People say revenge is a dish best served cold. But for me, it was a hot cup of coffee, and I simply acted first. Hello, my dears. What a blessing to have you here with me today. My name is Grace, 78 years young, and I'm speaking to you from my peaceful town of Staunton, Virginia. I'm always curious to know where this old grandma's confessions are being heard. What city or small town are you watching this from? Please leave a comment to let me know where you're from. I love to read them and feel our connection from all over. And now, settle in. I'm going to tell you the story I've kept secret for 65 years. I was born in a simple little house in Harrisonburg, back in Virginia. It was a small house, but full of life, with a backyard that had a bit of everything. A dogwood tree, a little herb garden that my mother tended with care, and even a chicken coop with some laying hens that gave us fresh eggs every morning. My father, Walter Sullivan, worked as a construction worker. He was an honest man of few words, but when he spoke, everyone stopped to listen. He had thick, calloused hands from so much work, but with them, he built our house brick by brick. My mother, Sarah Johnson Sullivan, was a homemaker. She took care of us with that quiet, strong way of country women. She worked magic in the kitchen with a little bit of everything. Her biscuits and sausage gravy were the best in the area. We were 3 siblings. Me, the middle one, squeezed between Mark, 2 years older, and Caleb, my little brother, 3 years younger. Mark was always Dad's favorite. He learned man things quickly. Fishing, fixing things, handling tools. Caleb was the joy of the house. Always smiling, mischievous. The kind of kid who makes people smile just by looking at him. Our childhood was simple, but happy. We played hide and seek in the empty lot near the house. We climbed trees, played with marbles. Sometimes on hot days, we'd go to the creek that ran along the edge of town. It wasn't much, but for us, it was a grand adventure. I remember the feeling of the cool water on my feet as we tried to catch minnows with our hands. The school was about a 15-minute walk from the house. It was a small school with just 4 classrooms, but Mrs. Anderson was a sweetheart. She was the one who taught me to enjoy reading. She would lend me books and say I had a good head for studying. I think she was the first person who believed I could be more than just the daughter of Walter, the construction worker. Our life changed when I was 12. My mother, who had always been strong as an ox, started complaining of severe headaches. At first, nobody paid much attention. Everyone gets headaches, right? But then, one Sunday morning, while she was washing the breakfast dishes, I saw her suddenly stop, her gaze lost. Her left arm went limp, and the cup she was holding shattered on the floor. Before I could scream for help, she collapsed. It was all very fast. "Stroke," said the doctor at the local clinic when we arrived, terrified. There wasn't much they could do in our little town. They sent her to the hospital in Richmond, but when she came home, she was no longer the same. Her left side was paralyzed, her speech slurred, needing help for everything: eating, dressing, bathing. From one day to the next, our home became a different place. That strong, active woman turned into a dependent person, confined to a small room in the back that my father hastily fixed up. And I, who had barely left childhood, suddenly found myself responsible for her care. "You're going to have to take care of the house now," my father told me, with that hard look that allowed no argument. "Your older brother needs to work with me on the job site, and the younger one is still too little. It's your responsibility." Just like that, at 12 years old, my childhood ended. I got up before everyone, made the coffee, packed lunches for Dad and Mark, fed Mom, changed the sheets when she couldn't control herself. I ran to school and ran back even faster, always afraid she might need something and I wouldn't be there. The worst part wasn't the hard work, the exhaustion, or having to give up childhood games. The worst part was watching my father and my older brother change, day by day. They came home from the job site tired, irritable, and took it out on me. Anything was a reason. The food is cold. The house is a mess. Your mother stinks. You didn't bathe her properly. At first, I cried in secret. Then I learned to hold back the tears. There was no point in crying. Nobody was listening. As time went on, the situation at home only got worse. What began as impatience and irritation from my father and older brother soon turned into something much darker and more painful. It wasn't just a shout now and then or a complaint about the food. It was constant, as if I had become the target of all their rage. "Hurry up, heifer. Your mother is waiting," my father would yell when he saw me sitting for a minute, trying to breathe. It was the first time he called me that, and the word cut me like a knife. It didn't take long for my brother Mark to pick up the same habit. The heifer's tired, wants to lie down in the pasture. He'd mock when he saw me exhausted after a full day of caring for the house and my mother. Sometimes he'd walk past me and shove me against the wall or smack me on the head like someone hitting a stubborn animal. "Stupid heifer, you can't even make decent rice." At 13, I wasn't going to school anymore. My father said it was a waste of time, that I had to stay home and take care of my mother. Mrs. Anderson even came to the house once, worried about my absences, but my father ran her off, saying our family's business was nobody's concern. But before he slammed the door, she looked past him and straight at me, her eyes full of a pain that mirrored my own. As I stood frozen in the hallway, she managed to press a small folded piece of paper into my hand. "If you ever need anything, Grace." "Anything at all," she whispered, just before the door shut. When that door slammed shut, my dears, it wasn't just the schoolhouse door. That was the last door connecting me to the outside world, Mrs. Anderson. She was the only person left who saw me, and not just the heifer. And right then, I knew I was completely and truly alone in this fight. That door slamming shut wasn't just on Mrs. Anderson. It was on Grace's last link to the outside world. She is completely isolated now, trapped with the very people she's starting to fear. What happens when a child has no one left to turn to? Let's find out together. I hid that paper in the lining of my shoe for months. I never used it. I was too terrified of what he would do, but just knowing it was there, that one person in the world still saw me, and not just the heifer, was a tiny flickering candle in my darkness. "Your mother is like this because of you," my father accused me one night after drinking almost a whole bottle of whiskey. "If you weren't so much trouble, she wouldn't have gotten sick." It was a lie. I knew it was, but I heard it so many times I started to believe it. Maybe it was my fault. Maybe I deserved to be treated this way. My only comfort was taking care of my mother. Despite everything, I loved her so much. Even though she couldn't speak well or hug me with both arms, I saw in her eyes a love that no one could take from us. In the moments when we were alone, I would brush her hair, tell her stories, talk to her about the flowers in the yard, anything to bring a little light into that suffering life. One of the hardest things was giving her the medicines. The doctor had prescribed several for her blood pressure, to prevent another stroke, for the pain. I kept everything in a shoebox with the schedules written on a piece of paper. It was a lot of responsibility for a girl my age, but I made sure never to fail. Only, over time, I started to notice something strange. No matter how well I took care of her, following all the instructions, my mother seemed to be getting worse instead of better. She was always drowsy, weaker and weaker, with deep dark circles under her eyes and a pallor that wasn't normal. Sometimes when I gave her water, I noticed she choked more frequently, as if she were even losing the ability to swallow. "Dad, I think Mom has a sore on her back that isn't healing. Wouldn't it be good to take her to the clinic?" I said one afternoon, gathering all the courage I had. He didn't even look up from the newspaper. "The doctor is expensive and useless," he replied curtly. "She's already doomed anyway. It's just a matter of time." The coldness of that response scared me. It was as if he were talking about an old animal, not his wife, the mother of his children. It was around that time that my little brother Caleb started to pull away. At 10, he was still a child, but he could already sense that something was very wrong in our house. He started staying at the neighbors' houses more, only coming home to sleep, as if he were afraid of what he might find. "Why do Dad and Mark call you heifer?" he asked me once, his little eyes full of confusion. I didn't know what to answer. How could I explain to a child something I didn't even understand myself? One night, while bathing my mother, I noticed something I had never seen before. Small bruises scattered on her arms and legs, as if someone had squeezed her hard. I stared at them, not understanding. She didn't move on her own. There was no way she could have hurt herself like that. "Mom, who did this to you?" I asked, even knowing she couldn't answer me clearly. To my surprise, she managed to babble a few words, among them, my father's name. Her eyes were filled with fear. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about what I had seen. My mother's broken words, my father's growing coldness. Something was happening in that house, something beyond the insults and shoves I was already used to receiving. The next day, I woke up determined to pay more attention. I started noticing little details. How my father insisted on making the tea my mother drank every night himself. How he and Mark would whisper when they thought I wasn't listening. How they looked at my mother, not with concern, but with impatience, as if they were waiting for something. "This old woman just won't die," I heard my father say one afternoon when they thought I was in the yard. The sentence chilled my blood. What were they waiting for? Why did they want her to die? That's when I started to spy, pretending to go out to hang the laundry when I was really listening behind the door, waking up in the middle of the night to see what was happening in the house, watching every gesture, every look exchanged between my father and my brother. The puzzle started to come together when, on one of those sleepless nights, I saw my father go into my mother's room, thinking everyone was asleep. Through the crack in the door, I watched as he took a small vial from his pocket and poured a few drops into the glass of water on the nightstand. Then, with a coldness that terrified me, he just stood there, watching her, with a smirk at the corner of his mouth. That scene changed everything for me. I suddenly understood why my mother was getting worse instead of better. I understood the looks, the whispers, the impatience. They weren't just mistreating me. They were doing something much worse to my mother. The question was, why? The answer came the next day, when my father left the key to his den on the table. We were never allowed to go in there. It was his sacred territory. But right then, I needed to know the truth. With my heart pounding, I went into the room and started searching the drawers. It was in a folder hidden in the back of the bottom drawer that I found what I was looking for. A life insurance policy in my mother's name for an amount that, to us, was a fortune. Next to it, several small bottles of medicine I had never seen before, with no labels or instructions, hidden in an old toolbox. In that moment, the truth hit me like a fist. Oh, that was a cold, cold feeling, my dears. You see, plain meanness is one thing, and it's frightening enough. But that kind of cold, calculating greed, the kind that measures your own mother's life in dollars, that was so much worse. I realized right then, I wasn't just living with angry men. I was living with monsters. It's one thing to be cruel. It's another to be this cold and calculating. Grace just found the motive pure, simple greed. She's no longer just a victim of abuse. She's a witness to a slow-motion murder plot. Let's see what she does, now that she knows the awful truth. My father and my brother weren't just waiting for my mother to die. They were helping it happen slowly, drop by drop, day after day. And I, without knowing, was being an accomplice, giving her the medications they switched, the tea they prepared. I went back to her room with a heavy heart. I looked at that frail woman in the bed and cried as I had never cried before. How could they do this to her? How could they be so cruel, so inhuman? "I'm going to save you, Mom," I whispered, holding her hand. I swear it. But how? How could a 3-year-old girl fight against 2 adult men, one of them her own father? How could I prove what they were doing? Who would believe me? The heifer, the girl who didn't even go to school. It was that night that something inside me changed forever. The scared little girl gave way to someone stronger, more determined, someone who was no longer afraid, someone who was ready to do whatever was necessary. The days that followed were the hardest of my life. Now that I knew the truth, every second in that house was like walking on a minefield. I had to pretend I knew nothing, keep taking care of my mother, obey my father's and brother's orders, while inside my heart was shattered. The worst part was giving my mother the medications. I was now sure that many of them were not what they were supposed to be. I started small acts of sabotage. I'd flush a few pills when no one was looking. I'd dilute the nightly tea with more water than usual. I'd pretend to give her the medicines but hide them under the pillow. In just a week, I noticed small improvements. My mother seemed more alert, less drowsy. Her eyes regained a bit of their sparkle, but that also meant danger. If my father and brother noticed, they would know something was wrong. The physical abuse got worse during that time. It was as if they sensed I was resisting in some way, even if they didn't know exactly how. The shoves became harder, the slaps more frequent. One time, my brother Mark pushed me against the stove with such force that I burned my arm. I had to bite my lip to keep from screaming in pain. When you live in that kind of hell long enough, I suppose you just get used to the burns, the pain on my skin. That was nothing, really, not compared to the ache I carried inside. You just swallow it down. It becomes a part of you, like a scar, and it just reminds you that you have to be harder. Pay attention to what you're doing, you useless heifer, he yelled, showing no remorse as he saw the red mark forming on my skin. If the food burns again, you're going to get a real beating. The threats became routine. My father would come home and the first thing he'd do was look for something to complain about. A dusty corner, a spot on the floor. Anything was an excuse. Useless. That's what you are, he'd say between swigs of whiskey. You can't even take care of your mother properly. She's getting worse every day. I knew it was the exact opposite. She was getting better precisely because I was stopping them from poisoning her, but I couldn't say anything. I had to lower my head and accept the insults, the humiliations, the blows. Every mark on my body was a reminder of what I was fighting to prevent. My little brother Caleb was starting to understand what was happening. One afternoon he found me crying, hidden in the backyard, after Mark had shoved me against the wall. "Why don't you run away?" he asked, his little eyes full of fear and confusion. "And leave Mom alone with them?" "Never," I replied, drying my tears. "They're hurting her, Caleb. They're giving her bad medicine." He didn't seem to understand completely, but he hugged me tight. It was the only hug I received in those dark days. I asked him not to tell anyone about our conversation. If my father or Mark found out, the consequences would be terrible. One night, while I was washing the dinner dishes, I heard my father and brother talking in his room. I crept closer, holding my breath to hear better. "She's not dying fast enough," my father complained, his voice slurred from the drink. "It's been over a year, and this woman won't take her last breath." "Maybe we need to increase the dose," Mark suggested with a coldness that chilled me to the bone. "Or try another method." "Too risky," my father replied. "It has to look natural, or the insurance won't pay. But I'm tired of waiting. I want the money now." "And the heifer?" my brother asked, referring to me. I felt a knot in my throat hearing that hateful nickname. "Is she suspicious?" The other day I caught her looking at the medicines with a weird face. There was a moment of silence before my father answered. "After her mother dies and we get the money, we'll take care of her. We'll send her far away, or put her in some institution. She's too stupid to make it on her own." Those words hit me like a punch to the stomach. It wasn't enough to kill my mother. I was next. They saw me as a problem to be eliminated, an obstacle in their path to the insurance money. I went back to the kitchen with my heart racing, my hands shaking so much I dropped a glass, which shattered on the floor. The noise brought my father and brother running to see what had happened. "What was that, clumsy?" my father yelled, grabbing my arm so hard it left marks. "You can't even hold a glass properly." "It was an accident," I mumbled, eyes down, trying not to show the terror I felt inside. "It slipped from my hand. That's why we call you heifer," Mark said with a malicious smirk. "Heifers don't have hands, they have hooves, and hooves don't hold glasses." The two of them laughed, as if it were the funniest joke in the world. I stood there motionless, feeling a hatred growing inside me, a hatred I had never felt before. In that moment, I knew I had to do something. I could no longer just defend myself or try to protect my mother discreetly. I needed a definitive plan. The next night, I pretended to be asleep when my father went to my mother's room to perform his usual ritual, a few drops in the glass of water. But this time, as soon as he left, I silently entered the room and swapped the glass for another one I had hidden under the bed with clean water. I saved the glass with the poisoned water in a safe place, wrapped in a rag, inside an old coffee can in the back of the yard. It would be the proof I needed if I managed to escape with her to get help. But who would help? Who could I turn to? The police station was in the next town. The neighbors were afraid of my father, known for his violent temper. Mrs. Anderson hadn't shown up since my father had kicked her out of the house. That's when I remembered Nurse Miller, who had cared for my mother at the clinic right after the stroke. She had always been kind to us, always asked how we were doing. Maybe she could help. Maybe she could examine my mother and confirm my suspicions. The problem was how to get to her without my father or brother finding out. I never left the house alone. One of them always accompanied me like a shadow, pretending it was for protection, but really it was surveillance. One morning, while serving coffee, I gathered my courage and took a chance. "Dad, I think Mom has a sore on her back that isn't healing. Wouldn't it be good to take her to the clinic?" He looked at me suspiciously, but I could see the idea worried him. A sore that wouldn't heal could turn into something more serious, something that would arouse suspicion. "I'll take her," he said finally after thinking for a bit. "You stay here and clean this house properly. It's a pigsty." This was my chance. While he was getting ready to take my mother, I ran to her room and whispered in her ear, "Mom, when you get to the clinic, try to give Nurse Miller a sign. Try to show her something is wrong, please." I don't know if she fully understood, but her eyes locked on mine with an intensity I hadn't seen in months. It was as if, despite all the mental confusion caused by the stroke and the poisons, she understood that her life depended on this moment. I spent the day in agony, waiting for their return. When they finally arrived, my father seemed irritated, more so than usual. "That meddling nurse wants to run some tests on her," he complained, dragging my mother's wheelchair inside. "Says her vital signs are strange, that there might be something wrong besides the stroke." My heart leaped. Nurse Miller had noticed. Maybe there was a chance after all. "When are the tests?" I asked, trying not to sound too eager. "Next week," he replied, looking at me suspiciously. "Why so interested? Want to get out of the work of taking care of her?" "No, Dad, of course not," I replied quickly. "I just want her to get better." He muttered something incomprehensible and went to the kitchen to get a drink. I took the chance to look quickly at my mother. Her eyes were different, more alive, as if they had regained a purpose. With an almost imperceptible movement, she wiggled the fingers of her right hand, the only ones that still responded well, and made a gesture that seemed to say, "Wait." That night, my brother Mark seemed especially agitated. He was pacing back and forth, whispering with my father, casting glances in my direction. I could feel that something was wrong, very wrong. When I went to give my mother her dinner, he stood in the doorway, watching me with those cold eyes. "You know, Heifer, I think you've been very worried about Mom lately," he said in a tone that made me shudder. "Almost as if you're afraid something might happen to her." I swallowed hard, trying not to show the dread I felt. "I just want to take good care of her," I replied without looking at him. "Like I've always done." "Yeah, but I think you're taking too good care of her, as if you know something you shouldn't know." He moved closer, getting just inches from my face. I could smell the cigarettes on his breath. "If you know something, little sister, you better keep your mouth shut, understand? Real quiet." The threat was crystal clear. They suspected me. Maybe they had noticed the missing pills or the subtle improvements in my mother's condition. Either way, I was in danger, and time was running out. That same night, something happened that changed everything. Something that turned my fear into determination, my hesitation into certainty. It was late, maybe close to midnight, when I heard a noise coming from my mother's room. I shot up, my heart pounding, and ran down the dark hallway. The door was ajar, and through the crack, I saw a scene I will never forget. My father was leaning over her bed, holding a pillow in his hands. On his face was an expression that mixed rage and determination. My mother, awake, was looking at him with eyes wide with pure terror. "I'm tired of waiting," he mumbled, his voice thick from drinking too much. "I'm tired of spending money on you. It ends tonight." He started to lower the pillow toward her face. It all happened so fast. Without thinking, I burst into the room screaming, "Dad, no!" He spun around, surprised by my presence. For a second, he seemed confused, as if he didn't understand what I was doing there. Then the confusion gave way to fury. He dropped the pillow and came toward me. "What are you doing in here, you meddler? Go to your room. You were going to kill her." I accused, unable to control myself. I saw you. You were going to suffocate her with the pillow. His hand struck my face with such force that I fell to the floor. The metallic taste of blood filled my mouth. You saw nothing, he said, dragging me by the hair. And if you tell anyone that crazy story, no one will believe you. They'll think it's just stuff in your stupid little girl head. He dragged me down the hall to my room and threw me on the bed. Stay there and don't come out until morning. And if I hear a peep, you'll regret it. He locked the door from the outside, leaving me in a panic. This is the moment pure desperation sets in. Grace tried to intervene, and all it did was get her locked away, helpless, while her father's plan accelerates. She is completely powerless. Or is she? What happens next is something you won't want to miss. Have you ever felt so desperate, my dears, that you truly have nothing left to lose? That night, locked in that room, listening to that awful silence from my mother's room, I knew nobody was coming to save us. It was the most terrified I had ever been, but it was also the moment that scared little girl died, and something else entirely was born. I ran to the window, but it had bars. A protection he had installed years ago, supposedly to keep robbers out. I spent the night awake, crying silently, desperate because I couldn't protect my mother. Every minute I imagined what might be happening in her room. Had he gone back to finish what he started? Was she still alive? When the sun came up, I heard the key turning in the lock. It was my brother Mark. Dad wants you in the kitchen. Now. I got up, trembling, my face still sore from the slap. Before leaving, I asked, "How's Mom?" He shrugged, indifferent. Alive. Unfortunately. That word unfortunately was like a stab to my heart. They really wanted her dead. It wasn't my paranoia. It wasn't an exaggeration. It was the plain truth. In the kitchen, my father was sitting at the table drinking black coffee. He seemed calm, as if nothing had happened last night. "Sit," he ordered, pointing to the chair across from him. I obeyed, feeling my legs go weak. "Your mother fell out of bed last night," he said, staring at me. "I was trying to put her back in when you burst in like a crazy person, screaming nonsense. Understand?" I understood right then that he was building a new version of the story. A version where I was, the crazy one, the troublemaker, the liar. "That's not what I saw," I replied, gathering all the courage I had left. His expression hardened. "You saw what I'm telling you you saw. And if anyone asks, that's what you're going to say. Or else." He left the sentence hanging, but the threat was clear. "Your mother's tests have been canceled," he continued, sipping his coffee calmly. "I called the clinic and said she's better, that she doesn't need them anymore." My heart sank. It was the only hope I had, that someone from the outside, someone with medical authority, would realize what was happening. "And before you get any more crazy ideas," he added, "you should know that I told the people at the clinic that you've been very nervous lately, imagining things. I told them we're worried about your head. They agreed that maybe it would be good for you to see a specialist." His plan was perfect. If I tried to report him, it would be his word against mine. And he had already planted the seed that I was unstable, imaginative, maybe even crazy. Who would believe a 13-year-old girl against a respected adult man in the community? That day, I was only allowed to see my mother for a few minutes, always with my father or Mark in the room. She seemed weaker than ever, her eyes half closed, her breathing shallow. When I tried to hold her hand, I noticed new purple marks on her wrist. At night, I heard my father and Mark talking again, this time in the kitchen. "We can't wait any longer," my father was saying. "That nurse is already suspicious, and your heifer of a sister almost ruined everything last night." "What do you want to do?" Mark asked in a low but eager voice, as if they were planning an adventure and not a murder. "Tomorrow is Saturday. We'll go out for a few drinks like always. But this time, we'll make it look like your mother had another stroke during the night. Natural, just like the doctor said could happen." My blood ran cold. They were planning to kill her the next night, and I would be next. I spent that night in a state of despair I had never felt before. I was trapped in a house with murderers, with no way to call for help, nowhere to run. I couldn't save my mother. I couldn't save myself. It was in that darkest moment that a memory surfaced in my mind. A A story my mother told before she got sick about how her grandmother, back in the Virginia countryside, knew the properties of plants, how some healed, others eased pain, and some could be dangerous if used the wrong way. Even the prettiest herbs can be poison in the right hands, she used to say. Poison. The word echoed in my mind like a bell. I looked out the window at the yard where the herbs my mother loved to tend grew. Some still survived, even with my clumsy care, among them some that she had taught me never to touch, never to use in food. A terrible idea began to form in my head. Now, you might be wondering, goodness grace, how does a 3-year-old girl know anything about poison? And the truth is, my dears, I didn't. I knew nothing about how much, or how little. It was just an act of pure desperation. All I could remember was my mother's warning. Never, ever touch that plant. And in that dark, dark moment, her warning sounded like, well, it sounded like the only answer I had. An idea that went against everything I believed, everything my mother had taught me about respecting life. But what else could I do? They were going to kill her. Then it would be my turn. No one would help us. No one would believe me. My head was spinning with contradictory thoughts. One part of me screamed that it was wrong, that I couldn't stoop to their level. Another part, more pragmatic, more desperate, insisted it was the only way out. It's self-defense, I whispered to myself, tears streaming down my face. It's to save Mom. To save myself. I closed my eyes and saw my mother's face before the stroke, smiling, full of life, full of love. I remembered the stories she told, the songs she sang to put me to sleep. I remembered how she always said I was special, that I was strong, that one day I would do important things. I opened my eyes with a new resolve. I would not let them kill her like an animal. I would not let them treat me like trash afterward. If they wanted to use poison, I would show them what real poison was. The next morning, I got up early, before everyone else. I went to the yard, and with trembling hands, I picked a few leaves from that plant my mother always warned to avoid. Not many, just enough. I kept them wrapped in a piece of cloth, hidden in my apron pocket. During the day, I acted normally, or as normally as possible under the circumstances. I took care of my mother, cleaned the house, and prepared the meals. My father and Mark seemed to be in a good mood, exchanging knowing glances when they thought I wasn't watching. That evening, as they always did on Saturdays, they sat on the porch with a bottle of whiskey, talking loudly, laughing at crude jokes. Every so often, one of them would come inside to check if I was taking good care of my mother. "I'm going to make some strong coffee for you," I offered when the bottle was about half empty. "It's getting chilly, it'll do you good." My father nodded without paying much attention. Mark just mumbled something I took as agreement. In the kitchen, with my hands shaking so much I could barely hold the coffee pot, I made the strongest coffee I had ever made. When the water boiled and the coffee was ready, I took the leaves from my pocket. They were dry now, easier to crumble. I put them in the bottom of their mugs and covered them with the dark coffee. The strong smell of the brew would mask any other aroma. For a moment, I hesitated. What I was about to do would change everything. Forever. There was no going back. Once it was done, I would carry this for the rest of my life. But then, I heard their laughter from the porch, that cruel laughter I knew so well, and I remembered the pillow in my father's hands, the purple marks on my mother's body, the threats, the insults, the humiliations. I remembered that, to them, we weren't people. We were just obstacles on the path to the insurance money. This is it, the point of no return. You can almost feel her hands shaking as she carries those mugs. She's not just a victim anymore. She's taking the most desperate, terrible action of her life. The silence that follows is deafening. Stay tuned for what happens in the next few moments. "Dad, Mark, the coffee is ready," I called out, taking the mugs to the porch. They took the mugs without even looking at me, still engrossed in their conversation about how much money they would have when this was all over. I turned and went back inside, to my mother's room. I sat beside her, holding her frail hand in mine. She was sleeping, or seemed to be, her breathing uneven, her face thin and pale. I stayed there, waiting, praying for forgiveness for what I had done, for what was about to come. The house had never been so quiet. I just sat there, and the silence. Oh, it was so heavy you could feel it. I don't think my heart was beating. I think it just stopped. I didn't know if I was waiting for the sound of death or the sound of freedom. Maybe that night, they were one and the same. I don't know how much time passed until I heard the first sound. Something falling, breaking. Then came a choked cry, followed by a louder one. I squeezed my mother's hand tighter. "It's going to be okay now," I whispered, though I wasn't sure if she could hear me. "No one is going to hurt you anymore. I promise." The minutes that followed are a blur in my memory. I heard more noises from the porch, mugs breaking, chairs falling, confused voices yelling, then silence. A heavy, oppressive silence that seemed to swallow the whole house. I sat paralyzed by my mother's bed, unable to move, to check what had happened out there. A part of me knew, but another part didn't want to confirm. As if, as long as I didn't see it, I could pretend nothing had happened. It was my mother who brought me back to reality. Her eyes opened and fixed on mine with a lucidity I hadn't seen in a long, long time. Her hand squeezed mine lightly. "Daughter," she whispered, her voice hoarse and weak but clear. "What did you do?" Those 3 words hit me like a lightning bolt. She knew somehow, even in her weakened state, she knew what I had done. "I saved you, Mom," I replied, tears streaming down my face. "They were going to kill you tonight, then it was going to be me." She closed her eyes for a moment, as if absorbing the weight of those words. When she opened them again, there was something different in them. Not reproach, as I had feared, but an infinite sadness. "Police," she managed to say. "Call the police." I knew she was right. There was no way to hide what had happened. Sooner or later, someone would find out. It was better if it was on our terms, with our version of the story. I stood up on shaky legs and went to the phone in the living room. We had never used it to call the police before. In fact, we rarely used the phone at all. It was more of my father's showpiece than a necessity. With trembling fingers, I dialed the number for the sheriff's office in the next town. When a man's voice answered, the words came pouring out. "Please, I need help. I think my father and my brother are dead." The voice on the other end became alert. "Where are you? What happened?" I gave our address, and after a moment's hesitation, I added, "They were poisoning my mother for months to collect the insurance money. I put something in their coffee. Please come quickly." Why did I confess? You might be asking that. Why not try to lie my way out of it? To be honest, this old woman still isn't sure. I think I was just so tired. So very tired of the lies, the whispers, the hiding. The truth, as awful as it was the only thing I had left. I just wanted it all to be over. I hung up and went back to my mother's room, feeling as if I were floating outside my body. It was as if that girl on the phone was someone else, not me. As if this whole thing was happening to another family, in another house. "They're coming, Mom," I said, taking her hand again. "Everything is going to be okay." But would it really? I had just confessed to a crime. It didn't matter what the circumstances were. It didn't matter why I had done it. There were 2 dead people on our porch, and I was responsible. Time seemed to crawl as we waited. At some point, my little brother Caleb appeared in the doorway, his eyes wide with fear. "What happened?" he asked in a shaky voice. "Dad and Mark are weird. They're not moving." I held out my hand to him, and he ran into my arms. "Everything's going to be okay," I repeated, though I wasn't sure it was true. "The police are coming. They'll help us." I don't know how long we stayed like that, me, my mother, and Caleb, when we heard the sirens in the distance. Soon the house was full of police officers and paramedics. Some went straight to the porch. Others came to check on my mother. They separated me from my brother, taking each of us to a different corner to ask questions. The officer who spoke to me was a middle-aged man with tired but kind eyes. He introduced himself as Sheriff Thompson. "Tell me what happened here, kid," he asked, sitting beside me in the kitchen. "From the beginning." And so I did. I told him everything. My mother's stroke, the abuse, the suspicions of poisoning, the discovery of the insurance policy, my father's attempt to suffocate her with the pillow, their plan for that night, And finally, what I had done. I know I did something terrible, I concluded, looking at my trembling hands. I know I'm going to jail, but I had to save my mother. There was no one else to help. The sheriff was silent for a long moment, watching me. I want you to show me where you found the insurance policy and the medicines, he said finally. For the first time in years, an adult is listening. More importantly, he believes her. All that time, Grace was secretly gathering the proof, and now it may be the only thing that saves her. This is the moment the whole case could turn. Don't miss what he finds. You can't know what that moment meant to me, my dears. For the first time in so long, a grown-up was listening to me. Someone in charge believed me. When Sheriff Thompson looked at me, not like the heifer, not like a liar, but like a person, that was the moment I thought, maybe, just maybe, I could really be saved. I took him to my father's den. I pointed to the drawer where I had found the documents. To my surprise, everything was still there. The policy, the suspicious vials, even my father's notes about dosages. And you said you saved a sample of the poisoned water your father was giving your mother? He asked. I nodded and led him to the back of the yard, where I dug up the can with the carefully wrapped glass. The sheriff called another officer, who put the glass in a plastic bag, labeled it, and secured it. When we went back inside, the paramedics were already taking my mother out on a stretcher. I ran to her in a panic. Where are they taking her? I asked, grabbing her hand. To the hospital in Richmond, one of the paramedics replied. She needs urgent care. My mother squeezed my hand with surprising strength. It's going to be okay, she managed to say, her eyes fixed on mine. Then she looked at the sheriff, who was standing beside me. She saved my life. The words came out with difficulty, but they were clear enough. The sheriff nodded gravely. We'll take care of her, ma'am. You can rest easy. When they took my mother away, I felt like they were tearing a part of me out. Caleb was in a corner of the living room, being comforted by a female officer. He looked so small, so lost. And my brother? I asked the sheriff. What's going to happen to him? We're going to find relatives who can take him in for now, he replied. Do you have any aunts, uncles, grandparents? I thought of my mother's family, whom we hadn't seen in years because my father wouldn't allow it. Mom has a sister in Louisville, Kentucky, Aunt Josephine. She always liked us. The sheriff wrote down the name and promised they would try to contact her. Then came the part I dreaded most. Grace, the sheriff said, using my name for the first time. You have to come with us to the station. I nodded, already expecting it. I was ready to face the consequences of what I had done. Before I left, I asked to say goodbye to my brother. They're going to take you to Aunt Josephine's house, I explained, hugging him tightly. She's good. She'll take good care of you. And you? And Mom? He asked, his eyes full of tears. Mom is going to the hospital to get better. And I have to go with the police for a while. Are you coming back? He insisted, holding my hand tightly. I didn't have the heart to tell him the truth that I probably wouldn't be coming back, at least not for many years. Someday, I replied, kissing his forehead. Take care of Mom for me. At the station, I spent hours answering questions, repeating my story several times to different officers. Then they took me to a small room with a cot, where I spent the night. The next morning, Sheriff Thompson returned with news. Your mother is stable at the hospital, he reported. The doctors ran tests and found high doses of medications in her blood, some that shouldn't even be there. This confirms your story about the poisoning. I felt immense relief knowing my mother was alive and being well cared for. And there's more, he continued. We found a diary belonging to your brother, Mark. He wrote about the plans to kill your mother, about how you two were a nuisance. It's quite disturbing. The sheriff seemed genuinely shocked by what he had read. We located your Aunt Josephine, he added. She's already come to pick up your brother Caleb, and she said she's going to stay with your mother at the hospital. Finally, some good news. At least they would be together. And me? I asked, already knowing the answer. The sheriff sighed deeply. It's complicated, Grace. You committed a serious crime. There's no denying that. But the circumstances are exceptional. He explained that because I was a minor, I wouldn't be tried as an adult. I would be sent to a juvenile judge who would decide my fate. I could be sent to an institution for juvenile offenders or, if I was lucky, placed on some kind of probation. I'm going to speak to the judge personally, the sheriff promised. I'll tell him what I saw in that house, what we discovered about your father and brother. I can't promise anything, but I believe he will take all of this into account. In the weeks that followed, I was in a juvenile hall awaiting the judge's decision. My Aunt Josephine came to visit me a few times, bringing news of my mother. She was improving little by little after they stopped giving her the wrong medications. She could speak better, and the doctors were optimistic about her recovery. Caleb came with my aunt, too. He seemed happy, or at least happier than I had ever seen him in our house. Aunt Josephine treated him with kindness, and he was already enrolled in a new school in Louisville. When the day of the hearing finally arrived, I was terrified. The prosecutor painted me as a cold-blooded monster. He argued that no matter what they had done, I had taken the law into my own hands, that I had chosen poison, which was the act of a coward, not a victim. I sat there, small and numb, believing I would be locked away forever. But then, Sheriff Thompson testified. He was my first defender. He presented the evidence I had saved: the poisoned glass of water, the lab reports from the hospital, the insurance policy, the unlabeled vials. He presented Mark's diary, which detailed their plan in his own smug, hateful handwriting. Then, my mother, frail but fierce, was wheeled into the courtroom. She refused the video conference. She wanted to be there. She looked the judge in the eye, her voice shaking but strong. She spoke of the pillow my father held over her face. She spoke of the bruises. And then she looked at me. "My daughter is not a monster," she declared, her voice echoing in the silent room. "She is a survivor. She did what I, her mother, was too weak to do. She saved us. She saved us." Just chills. Those 3 words from her mother in that courtroom are more powerful than any lawyer's argument. This is the climax of Grace's entire fight for an ounce of justice. But is it enough to keep her free? The judge's decision is next, so stay right there. The judge, a man with a stern face but eyes that had seen too much, looked at the prosecutor. "What would you have her do, sir?" he asked, his voice quiet but sharp. "Wait for them to succeed?" The evidence here is not of a cold-blooded murder, but of a desperate, terrified child fighting a war in her own home. It was a battle, my dears, and in the end, the truth was too strong to ignore. The judge ruled that I had acted under extreme duress and threat to life. I was not sent to a detention facility, but my journey was far from over. I was sentenced to 3 years of strict assisted probation, with mandatory psychological counseling, and I would be a ward of the state until my mother was fully recovered and deemed fit to be my guardian. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I looked at Sheriff Thompson, who was smiling discreetly. "You will be allowed to go live with your Aunt Josephine in Louisville, along with your mother when she is discharged from the hospital, and your brother Caleb," the judge continued. "But you must understand that what you did was wrong, regardless of the circumstances. Justice should not be taken into one's own hands, even in desperate situations." "I understand, Your Honor," I replied. My voice choked with emotion, "and I accept any conditions." "There is one more thing," he added. "When your mother is fully recovered, the insurance policy will be paid out to her, as she was the legal beneficiary. Your father had tried to change this, but he didn't have time to complete the process." That news stunned me. The money my father and brother were willing to kill for would now help my mother restart her life. There was a poetic justice in that which did not go unnoticed. That same day, I left the institution with my Aunt Josephine. We went straight to the hospital to see my mother, who cried as she hugged me. She was different, still weak, still with lingering effects from the stroke, but there was a light in her eyes I hadn't seen in a long time, a light of someone who was finally free. My mother's recovery was slow but steady. After 3 months in the hospital, she was finally discharged and came to live with us at Aunt Josephine's house in Louisville. With the insurance money, we bought a small, more comfortable house in Staunton, a quiet little town in Virginia, where no one knew us, where we could start over without the weight of the past chasing us. The 3 years of probation were difficult. I had frequent nightmares. I blamed myself for what I had done. No matter how much the counselor assigned to me tried to show me that I had acted out of extreme desperation. But little by little, with the support of my mother, Caleb, and Aunt Josephine, I began to understand that despite the terrible act I committed, I was not a terrible person. I remember one night, maybe 6 months after we'd moved to Louisville, I woke up screaming, soaked in sweat, convinced I could still smell the coffee and the bitter herbs. I was back in that kitchen, my hands shaking. I couldn't breathe. Aunt Josephine ran into my room. She didn't shush me, she didn't tell me to forget. She just sat on the bed, wrapped a blanket around my shaking shoulders, and held me. "You're not there anymore, Grace," she whispered, over and over. "You're here. You're safe. And you are loved." She stayed with me until the sun came up. It was then I realized that healing wasn't about forgetting the darkness. It was about learning to live in the light, surrounded by people who wouldn't let the shadows take you back. "You made an impossible decision in an impossible situation," the counselor would say. "Now you need to learn to live with that and to forgive yourself." And that's what I tried to do, day after day, year after year. I went back to school, took care of my mother, watched my brother grow up happy and healthy, built a life that honored the second chance I was given. Today, 65 years after those terrible days, I live a quiet life here in Staunton. I never left this little town after we moved here. I found a place here where I could heal my wounds, where I could rebuild myself as a person. My mother lived for 10 more years after I saved her from that hell. She never fully recovered from the stroke. She always needed a cane to walk and had trouble speaking when she was tired. But they were 10 years of peace, of love, of true affection. She got to see Caleb graduate from high school, see me start nursing school. I believe she passed on in peace, knowing her children were safe, that they had a future ahead of them. Aunt Josephine stayed with us until the end, even after we bought our own house here in Staunton. She never wanted to go back to Louisville. "My place is with you," she'd say with that sweet smile that was her trademark. She was the one who taught me to forgive not my father or my brother, but myself. She was the one who helped me understand that a decision made in desperation does not define who we are for the rest of our lives. My brother Caleb grew up strong and good, without the shadows of the past chasing him as they did me. He graduated with an engineering degree, married a lovely girl named Jessica, and gave me 2 nephews and a niece who are the light of my life, Gabriel, Rachel, and Mateo. Today he lives in Washington, D.C., but he comes to visit me regularly, especially on holidays and birthdays. As for me, I followed the path of nursing. Maybe it was a way of compensating, of trying to save other lives after having taken 2. I worked for over 30 years at the small hospital in Staunton, caring mainly for the elderly and patients with chronic illnesses, those who, like my mother, needed constant care and special attention. I got married at 28 to David, a gentle and patient man I met during my clinicals at the hospital. He knew my story. I told him before I accepted his proposal, thinking he would run away upon learning about my past. But he just took my hands and said, "It's not our worst moments that define who we are, but how we choose to live after them." My David. Oh, my sweet David. Love, my dears, true love. It isn't about hiding your past. It's about finding that one person who can look straight into the deepest, darkest parts of you, take your hand and say, "You don't have to walk in that shadow alone anymore. I'm right here." We had 2 children, Mary and Henry. I raised them with all the love and affection I could give, always conscious of never reproducing the abusive patterns I saw in my childhood. David was an exemplary father, the kind of man who would play on the floor with the kids, who never raised his voice, who respected everyone around him. I lost my David 12 years ago to a massive heart attack. It was an immense pain, but different from the one I felt in my adolescence. This was a clean pain, without the poison of hatred or fear. Just longing, just love. Today I live alone in this simple little house, but I never feel lonely. My children live nearby, Mary right here in Staunton, and Henry in Richmond, just a couple hours drive away. I have 5 grandchildren who fill my life with joy when they come to visit. The oldest, Philip, is already in college. The youngest, Julia, is just 8 years old and loves it when I make apple fritters for her on Sunday afternoons. My days are peaceful, filled with small activities that bring me pleasure. I wake up early, have my coffee looking out at the garden I tend with such care. I have a cherry tree that bears fruit twice a year. The grandkids love to climb it to pick the little red, sweet fruits. I also have rose bushes that my neighbor, Mrs. Clark, gave me, and a little herb garden I use to make teas and season my food. 3 times a week, I go to the town's community center to participate in a craft group. I crochet, knit, embroider, things I never had the time or opportunity to learn when I was young. My patchwork quilts are famous around here. I've already made over 50, most of them donated to nursing homes and children's homes. On Wednesdays, I participate in a project at the local elementary school where I read stories to the children. Stories of overcoming, of courage, of kindness values I believe are fundamental for shaping good people. The little ones call me Grandma Gracie and run to hug me when I arrive. It's one of the greatest joys of my week. On Sundays, I go to church in the morning. I'm not overly pious, but I find comfort in faith, in the idea that there is a greater purpose for everything, even for suffering. After the service, I usually have my children and grandchildren over for a family meal. The house gets noisy, full of laughter and conversation exactly as a house should be. I never spoke again about what happened that Saturday night, so many years ago. My children know, of course. I felt they had a right to know the truth about their past. But to the rest of the world, I'm just Miss Grace, the retired nurse who does volunteer work and adores her grandkids. Sometimes, when I'm alone at night, looking at the stars from my porch, I think about how strange life is, how a single moment can change everything forever. I think about what would have happened if I hadn't discovered my father's plan, if I hadn't made that desperate decision. Probably neither I nor my mother would be alive. Caleb would have grown up alone, perhaps becoming like his father and brother. I am not proud of what I did. I will never be proud. Taking a life is a terrible thing. It doesn't matter the circumstances, but I also don't torture myself as I used to. I learned to live with my past, to accept that in that moment, with the knowledge and resources I had, I did what I believed was the only option to save my mother and myself. Sheriff Thompson, who was so important in those difficult days, became a friend over the years. He retired from the force and also came to live in Staunton, saying he wanted peace after so many years of seeing the worst of humanity. Until his death 5 years ago, we used to have coffee together on Mondays. He always said that my case made him rethink many things about justice and compassion. Today, looking back, I see that my life has been a long road of redemption. Every patient I cared for in the hospital, every child I educated, every gesture of kindness I practiced, it was all part of my attempt to balance the scales, to give back to the world more than I took from it. I don't know if I succeeded. I don't know if it's possible, but I know that I tried every day to be better than I was the day before. And maybe, in the end, that's all any of us can do. Thank you, my dears, for staying with me until this very last moment. In my 78 years of life, I have learned that the line between a monster and a survivor is sometimes very thin. When I was 13, the world didn't give me any right choices. I only had one choice to survive. Whatever you are facing, no matter how cornered you feel, always remember that there is a hidden strength inside you that you don't even know you have. Never believe the words of an abuser who tells you that you are worthless or weak. You have value. Your life has value. Today, I tell this story not to seek judgment, but to tell anyone who is in the dark, there is always a way out. If my story has touched you, I ask you to help me spread it by hitting like on this video and subscribing to the channel. That helps YouTube know that stories of survival and hope need to be heard more. And so I know you've heard my whole confession, and so we can build a strong community together. Please leave the word strength in the comments below. Remember this old grandma's words: the past doesn't define you, but how you choose to live after it does. I wish you peace, and always keep the faith.